All right. So that was one of the first things I was going to tell you this morning, is that we are recording this session for those who aren't able to attend this morning's information session. So good morning. Welcome to our information session on major capital grants. My name is Megan Tate, and I'm the Director of Community Grants at the Winnipeg Foundation. We've recently had some feedback on how to make our presentations more accessible to those with a vision impairment. And one of the things that they shared with us is that it's helpful to describe what people are seeing on the screen. So first, I'll describe myself. I'm Megan. I'm wearing a white blouse. I have shoulder length brown hair, and behind me is yellow, green, and blue work of art that I'm using as a background for today's session. I also want to describe the first slide, which is a diverse group of people who have a connection to the Winnipeg Foundation, holding a sign with their favorite cause. And that includes Doris Coop from the Vision Impaired Resource Network. Doris is on the far right of your screen. It's just a happy coincidence that she's on this slide, but we're so grateful to Doris for sharing her knowledge with us on how to make this presentation more accessible. So a couple of housekeeping notes. Like I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded for those who aren't able to make it. It'll be posted on the Foundation's website and social media channels in the next few days, so you can watch it again or share it with colleagues who maybe weren't able to attend today. If you have any questions, we invite you to use the chat feature. We've left time at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you might have. We'll try to get through as many as we can. Another tip from Doris is to help cut down on visual clutter. The chat will only be viewed by members of our staff. So only our staff will see our questions, but they'll make sure that those get answered. I'm one of the people who will see the chat. I cannot multitask, so I won't be able to answer your questions during the presentation, but Mercy and Carrie are on standby to manage the chat function. And finally, if you have questions that are really specific to your organization's circumstances, we recommend that you follow up with a member of our grants team after today's presentation. So if all of us were meeting in person today, I'd begin by acknowledging that we're gathered together on Treaty 1 territory. So even though we're not together in the same room, I'd still like to take a moment and acknowledge to you that I'm speaking from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I invite all of you, wherever you are, to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are today. All right, a bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Winnipeg Foundation, although I've seen who's registered for the session, so I think most of you know who we are and what we do. I'll talk a little bit about our overall grant making in 2022, and then dig into the details about our major capital grants, including our criteria, our application process, the assessment that we use when reviewing applications, and finally some examples of some recent major capital grants. So about the Winnipeg Foundation and our grant making. Last year, the Winnipeg Foundation granted a record-breaking $84.9 million to 1,100 charities. When most people think of the Winnipeg Foundation, they often think of our response for grant making. So those grants that are awarded in response to applications from community organizations like yours. However, that's not actually the largest category of grant making that we do. So you'll see on the screen in front of you, the largest category of grants that were awarded last year were those from agency and designated funds, just shy of $32 million. And these are grants from funds where the recipient has been designated at the time that the fund is established by the donor or by the agency. The second bar chart that you see on your screen, that represents our responsive grants, which last year totaled $18.4 million. This budget includes major capital grants, one-time community grants, and other special granting programs like Nourishing Potential or Literacy for Life. So our granting in 2022, we know that the need for funding is great, and we anticipate that our 2022 granting intakes will be very competitive as we continue to see an increase in applications across all of our granting programs. Once again, in order to respond to COVID-related needs in our community, we've adjusted our granting intakes a little bit. We recently closed an intake for ADAPT grants, which is designed to support community organizations as they adapt to a continuously uncertain future. We have another intake for one-time community grants coming up in the fall. Applications are due in October. And finally, we have a range of special granting programs, and we encourage you to check our website for details about those granting programs, including eligibility criteria and some of the timelines. So, major capital grants. Major capital grants is considered one of our special grant programs, which means that you can apply for a major capital grant in addition to applying for or holding any other type of grant at the Winnipeg Foundation. It's the only grant program where we have a two-stage application process, with stage 1 applications due May 16th. When we talk about major capital grants, these are grant requests for capital projects where the request to the Winnipeg Foundation is $100,000 or greater. One final thing to note about major capital grants is that it is our most competitive grant program. Less than half of stage 1 applications that are submitted receive funding. And so just a few statistics to demonstrate the growth of this granting program. In 2019, we received 15 stage 1 grant applications with requests totaling $5.1 million. Of those applications, 10 were invited to submit a stage 2 application. In stage 2 of those 10 stage 2 applications, 8 were approved for funding with a total budget of $1.7 million. Fast forward to last year, when we received 40 stage 1 applications with requests totaling over $18 million. 22 of those proposals were invited to submit a stage 2 application. And at the end of the day, 20 applications were approved with a total budget of $4 million. So you can see our granting budget is growing, but it's not keeping pace with the number of applications that we're receiving. So the budget for this intake of major capital grants hasn't been set yet. Major capital grants are always the first grants decided as part of our next fiscal year, which begins on October 1st, 2022. However, I anticipate that the budget will be somewhere between $2 and $3 million. So some of the criteria for major capital grants. First, organizations must be a registered charity in order to apply to the Winnipeg Foundation. It's the same across all of our granting programs. Second, projects must primarily benefit the people of Winnipeg. That means the majority of the projects will happen within the city of Winnipeg, although of course there are exceptions to that. One example being summer camps, where lots of kids attend summer camp outside of the city, but many of those children are from Winnipeg. But that is one of the criteria. The projects must primarily benefit the people of Winnipeg. It's also important to note that grants are awarded for a very specific purpose or project. And so we don't sort of provide general support to broad, sprawling capital campaigns. Again, we're looking for specific projects to support. Our grants committee recently revised their definition of what they're looking for with capital requests, identifying diverse kinds of infrastructure that include both renovations and new builds, as well as digital assets and natural landscapes. So an example of a natural landscape, for example, several years ago, the Winnipeg Foundation provided a major capital grant to the Indigenous Peoples Garden at Assiniboine Park. So that's an outdoor natural landscape that's considered as part of this program. Eligible expenses also include a wide range of related capital costs, such as architecture fees, site testing, site prep, design fees, as well as, of course, construction costs. And the final thing to note is that grants are not made retroactively, which means we won't cover costs undertaken prior to the grants committee or board decision meeting date. So a little bit about the application process. As I shared, it is a two-stage application process. So stage one, applications actually opened yesterday. So if you go onto our website and hit the link, you will be able to access the stage one application form. Applications are due on Monday, May 16th at 4:30 p.m. And please note that late applications will not be accepted. Notification of the status of your stage one application will go out in late May. Those that are invited to submit a stage two application will receive notification at this time. And as we've seen from the statistics that I shared earlier, it is important to note that an invitation to submit a stage two application is not a guarantee of funding. It simply means that our board is interested in learning more about your project. Stage two applications, those are due on June 30th at 4:30 p.m. A notification of the decision will be in late 2022. So some information about the application process. So first, want to share a little bit about our new grants management system. A year ago, we launched a new grants management system to host the 2021 intake of major capital grants. I will say there's definitely been a learning curve for both staff and community organizations, but we have been gradually moving all of our grant programs onto the new grant application portal. So currently, applications for major capital grants, one-time community grants, and camp and summer program grants can be found on the new grants management system. And over the course of the next year, we hope to gradually move all of our other grant programs onto the new system. But in the meantime, if you're not sure where to find an application form for a particular grant program, just go to that grant program's webpage, click the Apply Now button, and it'll take you to the correct application form. We are really excited about this new online application portal. It's going to be a one-stop shop for grant applicants where you'll be able to see all of your grant applications and the notifications that you've received. Eventually, you'll be able to track payments and submit final reports. As I mentioned, there's a bit of a learning curve for the new system, so we're just working to get all of the features online and available to community organizations. Another note about the new grants management system, if you haven't logged onto this system yet, you will need to create a profile for your organization in order to access the grant application. This system is separate from our old grant application portal, so you will need to set up a new username and a new password for yourself. We have heard from community organizations that creating the profile does take a little bit of time, so make sure that you start this work well ahead of the deadline. But the good news is you only ever have to do this once. Once you've set up the profile, the same profile will be used to apply for all grant programs to the Winnipeg Foundation currently in the new grant management system. And going forward, all you'll need to do is to make sure that the information in your profile is kept up to date. So if you've already created a profile in our system, maybe you've applied for another grant program or you just took us up on our offer when we announced the new grants portal. If you've already got that profile, yay, you're now ready to access open funding opportunities in the portal, including major capital stage one. So a bit about the stage one application. We really think of this as the case for support for your project. It's going to be a high-level case for support. It's the initial introduction to your project. So we really encourage you to try to keep the information that you provide within that 300-word mark. The fields in the application do allow for more words. However, it was built this way so that organizations who are submitting a stage two application have an opportunity to elaborate on their answers. In this stage one, we're really looking for how you're able to clearly articulate your case for support, which is obviously an essential component of any capital campaign. So some of the components of stage one include a description of the project. Again, encourage you to be brief with your description of the project. We do ask for a 1 to 2 sentence project summary. We also want to know why this project is needed and how it'll benefit the community. In stage 1, we do also ask for a high-level budget for the project, both the costs and the revenues. Some of the information, wrong slide. Some of the information we're looking for include obviously how much you're requesting from the Winnipeg Foundation and other anticipated sources of additional funding from various sources, government, other foundations, private donors, and private fundraising. And of course, we're also interested in how much funding has been confirmed to date. So a little bit about the assessment of those stage 1 applications. So some of the things that we consider are project readiness. And this is a big one. So it's really one of the key things the foundation is looking for when it comes to major capital grants. Has your organization undertaken the necessary planning before embarking on this project, particularly if it's a formal capital campaign? And just a note that if you're not quite there yet with the readiness and the planning part of your capital campaign, the foundation does have other grant programs that can help you with some of those strategy or planning pieces. This includes our organizational development grants or our one-time community grants. Another big part of project readiness is the funds you've raised to date. There are times certainly where the Winnipeg Foundation can be a lead funder, where there's an opportunity for us to play a strategic role and perhaps leverage other support. However, this does need to be balanced because we don't want to tie up funding resources on projects that are still several years away from realization. So it is, again, that balance of being able to leverage other funders, but also investing in projects that are quite close to being ready to go. Other factors we consider are, what are the clear measurable benefits to community? How will the space be used is one of the things we want to know. We also want to know what the lasting impact of the project is. So prioritizing legacy projects for your organization over perhaps some projects that more are an intermediate or quick fix. Other things that we factor in as part of that stage 1 assessment is simply the number of applications that we receive in the context of our budget. If we know that our budget is going to be between $2 and $3 million, we're not going to invite $18 million worth of projects through to stage 2. So that's part of what factors into our decision making. We also look at an organization's grant history. It would be very unusual for an organization that has no grant history with the Winnipeg Foundation to receive a 6-figure grant. At the same time, it would be unlikely for an organization to receive a major capital grant 2 years in a row, or even within a few years of their most recent major capital grant. In any given year, only between 10 and 20 community organizations receive a major capital grant from the Winnipeg Foundation. So we want to make sure that there's many organizations that have the opportunity to access this funding. And finally, we're looking for balance across the charitable sector. At the end of my presentation, I'll share examples of recently funded projects, and you'll see that we try to fund projects across all of the areas that the Winnipeg Foundation supports, including arts and culture, community service, health, education, and environment. So a little bit about the stage 2 application. Notification of your invitation to submit a stage 2 application will come via email. The link to the stage 2 application will be found in your online account. The stage 2 application is fairly similar to our one-time community grant application. So if you filled out those before, you'll know really what to expect. And the notification of final decision, again, will be in late 2022. Some other things, as part of the stage 1 application, we don't request any attachments, but as part of the stage 2 application, this is an opportunity to provide more detailed information. So that could include the capital campaign committee structure, the people who are part of that capital campaign, your fundraising goals and timelines, capital campaign materials, a business plan perhaps that you've done as part of launching the campaign or thinking about how the space will be used. Those kinds of things can also be included in the stage 2 application. So this is where we'll be looking for more detail about the project and the evidence of need. Oh, I jumped ahead. So again, if applicable, we'll be looking for attachments such as information about your capital campaign committee structure, those fundraising goals and timelines, campaign materials. We also want to know how you're going to measure the success of the project. And finally, we want to know about the financial support for ongoing operating costs. So this is especially critical for community organizations that are proposing a project that will increase the size of their footprint. So we want to know how you'll be able to manage the operating costs for that increased space for your organization. So some of the things that we look for in a stage 2 application. First of all, we take a deeper dive into all of the assessment criteria we use for stage 1. In addition, we look more closely at organizational preparedness. How ready is your whole organization ready to take on a project of this size? Again, we're looking at the funding that's been confirmed to date. We often look at letters of support from key stakeholders. And finally, we want to ensure that the proposed capital project is meeting accessibility and sustainability standards. I promised that I would share some examples of recent major capital grants. So on your screen are a few of the projects that received support through last year's major capital grants intake. The West Central Women's Resource Center received $500,000 for a transitional housing project. The Mama Wichita Center received $500,000 for the creation of a new family care center in Point Douglas. Mentoring Artists for Women's Art received $250,000 for the development of the Marketlands property into a creative hub. The Wrench received $250,000. They're an organization in need of a new location. And finally, Candace House received $100,000 in order to expand their space that they use for community work. So as you can see, there's quite a range both in the nature of the projects, the causes that we support. You'll see everything here again for support for children, youth, and families, arts and culture, environment and recreation. And there's also diversity in terms of the size of the grants that are awarded. And often, but not always, but often the amount provided by the Winnipeg Foundation is proportional to the overall project budget. So when you see a large scale transitional housing project, that's a larger grant than perhaps a more modest program space expansion like what you see at Candace House. So that kind of ends the formal part of the presentation, but we did promise an opportunity to answer some questions that you might have at the end of the presentation. Again, my colleagues, Carrie Ryan and Mercy Oluwafemi, are going to be reading out some questions for me to be able to answer all of you today. Again, asking you to keep your questions more general. If you've got a question that's very specific to your organization's circumstance, we'd encourage you to reach out to a member of our grants team if you've already got a contact. And if you're not sure, you can email grants@wpgfdn.org. Actually, I think that's probably on the next screen. It's not. You can email grants@wpgfdn.org and we'll make sure that somebody gets back to you and has a conversation with you about your proposed major capital application. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie and to Mercy. This is a new format for us for our webinars, so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that Carrie and Mercy can read out some questions to me.
Megan, I only have, pardon me, one here so far, somebody asking about how to get copies of the presentation slides.
Oh, that is a great question. We will make a PDF of the presentation slides available on our website at the same time that we post the recording of today's session.
Great, thank you. Okay, I do.
Megan.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mercy.
Sure, thanks. So Megan, I've just had a question come in. Someone's wondering if they apply for a larger amount, if the project is over $6 million, would they be also considered for smaller contribution amounts? So i.e., if we apply for $500,000, but the Winnipeg Foundation only gives us $400,000, is it a possibility or would we be declined due to a larger ask?
That's a great question. Thank you so much to whoever asked that. Yes, it's not an all or nothing proposition that if the grants committee and our board of directors feel that they can't meet the full amount of your request, they might still consider a lesser amount be awarded as long as it can still make a meaningful contribution to the overall project. And there's 2 points actually where that can happen. Sometimes as part of that stage 1 assessment, you might receive feedback that the size of your request is higher than what our board or grants committee would consider. So you might get that feedback at stage 1. But even when we move to stage 2, again, like the example provided, if you ask for 500,000, but the Winnipeg Foundation felt that they could perhaps allocate a lesser amount, that your project would still absolutely be considered.
Megan, I have a somewhat related question here still on budgets. What percentage of funding will the Winnipeg Foundation provide? Do we need a specific amount of other funding?
Yeah, so we don't have an exact formula for how much we could consider in terms of the percentage of an overall campaign. It really depends on a whole range of other factors. So again, I think put forward an application where the amount requested is kind of what you realistically hope to receive from the Winnipeg Foundation, and we'll take it from there and can provide you guidance kind of throughout the process.
Great, thank you.
Can we apply for capital grants if your organization is receiving another Winnipeg Foundation grant?
Yes, so the major capital grants is considered a special granting program. So you can apply for a major capital grant, even if you've applied for other granting programs through the Winnipeg Foundation, and even if you have other outstanding grant files with the Winnipeg Foundation. So yes, is the short answer.
Okay, Meg, here's another one. What type of consultation reports would you be looking for that support plans for a major capital project?
Can you say that one more time, Carrie?
What type of consultation reports would you be looking for that would support a major capital proposal?
Yeah, so again, it really depends on the project. Certainly, we'd be interested in seeing if your organization put together a business plan, identifying kind of the need for the capital project and how you anticipate that the space will be used and funded going forward. Some organizations, again, depending on the project, might have engaged in community consultations or needs assessment for their community or for the project. That's kind of some of the homework that we might be interested in seeing as part of your proposal.
Thank you.
Hi, Meg. Here's a question about Smart Simple. Will we be able to save our work in the grant application system before submitting?
Yes, that is a great question. It's not one of those application systems that kind of times out on you. You can go in and save your work as many times as you wish before you hit submit. We do encourage you to save your work often. We know there's all kinds of gremlins that can occur in our computers, so we do encourage you to save that work often, but you can absolutely start your application and come back to it later before you're ready to submit.
Thank you.
Okay, here's a group that is considering 2 large capital projects and is asking, can we submit 2 stage 1 applications?
No, so organizations can only submit 1 major capital grant application per calendar year. So you'll need to identify which is your highest priority project. And that might be a case where you want to kind of chat through both of the projects. Our staff might be able to provide you some guidance. Maybe one project is a better fit for the foundation over another. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your grants team contact, or again, to email us at our grants@ email address.
Thank you.
Here's another question, Meg. Is there a requirement or recommendation to have other non-public funding sources or private funding as opposed to government?
Yeah, so really, again, it depends on the nature of your project. We would always encourage other funders. It would be incredibly rare for the Winnipeg Foundation to be the sole funder for a major capital project, again, just given the scale of those projects. But from our perspective, we don't have a preference for what those other funding sources are. Certainly, if there's a government funder that is, for lack of a better word, an obvious funder for your work. If you're an arts organization, for example, engaging in a major capital project, have some of the other arts funders like Canada Council, MAC, or WAC supported the initiative. But again, it really depends on the project, and we don't have any formula or requirements in terms of the breakdown of government versus private funding before we consider an application.
Okay, Meg, here's a question. Given the turnaround time between stage 1 application and approval, at what point in the planning/fundraising of a capital project would you recommend submitting an application? And could an application be resubmitted for consideration in the following year if the decision was that it wasn't ready at the time of the first application?
Yes, absolutely. So I think because we only issue a call for proposals for major capital grants once a year, and I've talked about the timelines, which are longer than for any of our other grant programs, that if you do have a capital project in the works, I think I'd encourage you to submit a proposal for this intake. We've absolutely had organizations submit a major capital grant, not be invited to stage 2 the first time they applied, but in subsequent years reapplied with a stage 1 application and then go on to be successfully funded, just depending on where they are in their campaign. So yeah, that's absolutely a possibility for your organization.
Carrie, you can go ahead with any other questions you might have on your hand.
Sure, I've got one more here. Does the application allow you to still apply to other family foundations within the Winnipeg Foundation? So, endowment funds held here that are run as separate donor advised funds, if you are successful with the major capital grants. So if you receive a major capital grant, are you still eligible to receive funding from other funds or foundations that are held within the Winnipeg Foundation?
Yeah, so that's also a great question, and thanks for asking that. It gives an opportunity to kind of provide a little bit more insight. So there's 2 ways that organizations can access donor advised funds at the Winnipeg Foundation. So some of our donor advised funds choose to work through our existing responsive grant application process. Probably the example that you're most familiar with is the Moffat Family Fund. So that's a donor advised fund where we would share the complete slate of applications that we receive in major capital grants or one-time community grants. And we would work with the Family Council to identify projects that they wish to support through their donor advised fund. And we are having more donor advisors choose to work with us that way. So we do share the list of major capital applications with the select group of donor advised funds held here at the Winnipeg Foundation. In addition, many of you might have relationships with donor advisors who have a fund here at the Winnipeg Foundation. And so receiving a major capital grant through our responsive major capital grants program does not preclude you from continuing to build those relationships with other donor advisors who have funds here at the Winnipeg Foundation who may wish to support your project. A great example of that would be Ronald McDonald House. that organization received a grant through our major capital grant program, but we also had a number of donor advised funds who chose to support that project kind of independent of our grant application process. So both things can happen for sure.
Okay, a follow-up question from the same person who posed that first question. Wondering if you're successful with major capital this year, can you continue to apply for subsequent years of support?
Just for clarification, do you mean subsequent years of support through the major capital grants program or through any of the Winnipeg Foundation's programs?
Yeah, I just sent that. Oh, it looks like through major capital. So I'm guessing it's a major capital project with a number of phases.
Yeah, that would be rare that a community organization would receive subsequent years of support for major capital grants. So, for example, none of the community organizations that received a major capital grant in 2020 received a major capital grant again in 2021. What our grants committee and our board sometimes do, although less so, is they might spread their contribution over a few years, but that doesn't require a new application. So I think the shortest answer would be, it would be very unlikely to receive subsequent like consecutive years of major capital support from the foundation, but certainly you'd be eligible for all other granting programs at the Winnipeg Foundation, including our one-time community grants.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan. Here's a question. We did receive a capital grant from the Winnipeg Foundation more than 10 years ago for a different project. Would that impact our being considered now?
So grant history is, of course, always a factor across all of our grant programs, but 10 years between major capital grants wouldn't be unrealistic. Certainly I've seen that in the past in community organizations grant history, that if it's been quite some time between major capital projects, that our grants committee and our board would consider a second one several years later.
Thank you.
Mercy, do you have any other questions on your end?
No, that's everything for me, unless someone is in the midst of typing in a question right now.
Just as I was saying that, another one came in on my end. Can applications for a multi-phase project, which may stretch over more than 1 year? Okay, because of logistics of the project. Oh, sorry, can applications be for a multi-phase project, which may stretch over more than 1 year because of logistics?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we don't have any firm deadlines or timelines around funds. We know that major capital projects, first of all, you can spend a fair bit of time in that fundraising stage. And we also know that fulfilling a major capital project can span over several years. Again, these are large scale projects with the added, I think, complexity of, we're hearing a lot about supply chain issues. And so we know some capital campaign projects in our community have been impacted by that as well. So when it comes to funding, for those organizations approved for a major capital grant, receive a terms of grant agreement, and that states that organizations have up to 2 years from the date of approval to access the funds. So we do provide quite a bit of lead time. And even with that, it's not automatic that if a project isn't ready to go, that we would withdraw those funds. It would be an ongoing conversation with the community organization, because again, we know those projects take time and will span over several years. So that's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
One last question from me, from my end. Do we provide examples in the application form of supplementary information that can be included in the stage 2 application? For example, letters of support, business plan, community list, etc.
Yes, there is You're testing my memory. We've only done the application through our new system once, but we do have a spot where organizations can attach any relevant information, and we do provide examples as part of that question. There is also a question specific to describing your capital campaign structure, where you'll be able to fill in a little bit of information about the structure, as well as those who are part of that committee. But again, if you have any questions about the types of attachments that you're thinking of applying and you're not quite sure, you can always send a quick email to our grants@wpgfdn.org email address.
No more new questions on my end.
Nothing else for me as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. And thanks for those great questions. I think if one person has a question, chances are others do, and it allowed us to provide a little bit more detailed information about our major capital grants program. Again, if you do have questions very specific to your community organization, don't hesitate to reach out, and we're happy to have that conversation with you. And I guess my final words of wisdom are, if you have not yet created a profile for your organization in our new grants management system, I'd encourage you to at least log on to the system in the next few days and just start that process of creating a profile for your organization, and just to familiarize yourself with the new grants management system. We've had feedback that it's really user-friendly, but it is new, and so we just want to make sure that you give yourselves the time that you need to put forward an application. All right. Well, thank you so much to all of you for attending today. As I noted, both the recording of today's session as well as a PDF of the slides will be made available in the next few days. So have a great rest of your day, everyone.